the Council of Nikaea. There was an increasing concern as the Great Crusade progressed about the use of psychic sorcery by agents and warriors of the Imperium. The Emperor was the most powerful human psyker to have ever lived, but he was deeply ambivalent about the growing spread of the mutant psyker genes through more and more of the human population. He rightly believed that most of mankind was not yet evolved enough, either psychically or spiritually, to truly control the great power of the warp, or avoid the corruptions and temptations offered by its more malevolent denizens. More and more often, during the progress of the Imperial conquest of the galaxy, the Imperial Army and Space Marines would make planetfall only to find that the populace were in thrall to mysterious powers and unnatural mystics called sorcerers. These people were essentially members of chaos cults who would resist the forces of the Emperor with sorcerers' psychic powers granted them by demonic entities from the warp. These psychic powers were also very akin to those used by the Thousand Sons Legion of the Primarch Magnus the Red. The Thousand Sons had come under intense criticism for their use of sorcery by the Primarch Mortarion of the Death Guard Legion, who knew by his own personal experience with sorcerers on his homeworld of Barbarus the dangers to be found in anything spawned from the warp, and Leman Russ of the Space Wolves Legion, for whom any battle fought through sleight of hand, clever deceit, or any trick other than straight physical combat was by definition dishonorable. Russ found the Thousand Sons' use of sorcery distasteful in the extreme. It was he who fought the hardest for the Imperium to ban the use of psychic powers after his own experiences during several campaigns of the Great Crusade, where his Space Wolves had fought beside the Thousand Sons. The schism grew so great that it threatened the very stability of the fledgling Imperium, and so the Emperor himself called for an Imperial conclave to resolve the issue once and for all. Both sides of the debate over the use of psychic abilities arrived at the world of Nikaea, determined to present their views, with the Emperor as the arbiter, enthroned above the dais in an ancient amphitheater that seated tens of thousands where the conclave was held. On one side of the question were the witch hunters like the Sisters of Silence, who presented their case by reciting a litany of human suffering inflicted upon the Emperor's own subjects by sorcerers enslaved by what would eventually later be recognized during the Horror's Heresy as chaos, of gibbering mutants who had lost their humanity, and of cults and power-hungry men and women who turned their psychic gifts to dark purposes. All present were also aware of the terrible damage that had been done by uncontrolled and demon-possessed psychers during the early days of the Age of Strife. On the other side was a powerful advocate for the continued use of sorcery, the Primarch Magnus the Red. His very presence frightened many, but he began to speak with a great charisma that only a Primarch could wield. His argument was that no knowledge was tainted in and of itself, and no pursuit of knowledge was ever wrong, so long as the seeker of that truth was the master of what he learned rather than its pawn. He spoke with finality that his 1,000 sons Astartes had mastered their knowledge of sorcery, and that there was no knowledge too labyrinthine for them to grasp, or that they could not master to serve humanity rather than enslaving it. Magnus called on the Emperor not to ban the use of psychic abilities, but to contribute to further research into their usage so that they might be harnessed more fully for the betterment of humanity and the Imperium. Magnus had spoken passionately with great power, and the participants at the Council of Nikaea became even more divided. While they had strong arguments in their favor to justify their anti-psyker position, the witch hunters could not effectively match Magnus's persuasiveness. The tension could easily have been cut with a knife when a group of Space Marine librarians approached the dais. The Emperor acknowledged them with a nod, and all present fell silent. Among the group were some of the greatest librarians of the Space Marine legions. They formed a semi-circle around the dais to indicate that they spoke as one voice. But it was a young librarian epistolary who spoke for the group. A psyker, he proposed, was like an athlete, a gifted individual whose native talent must be carefully nurtured. Psykers were not innately evil in themselves, but like any tool, could be used for either good or evil purposes. Sorcery, however, was the knowledge of how to wield psychic powers that had to be sought for, even bargained for with the foul entities of the warp. No one could be truly sure who or what had benefited in the deal. The librarians proposed that all psykers be strictly educated by the Imperium with the express purpose of using their abilities to serve mankind. This should become an immediate Imperial priority. The practice of sorcery, on the other hand, would forever be outlawed as an unforgivable offense against humanity and the worst kind of heresy. The Council of Nikaea was also the trial of Magnus the Red, for he was accused of sorcery and of introducing sorcerers' practices to the Space Marine legions through his lead role in the institution of the Corps of Librarians. As the evidence of Magnus' continued practice of sorcery became apparent, the Emperor barely contained his wrath as he pronounced judgment on the Primarch of the 1,000 Sons. The Emperor had entrusted his son years before to obey his bidding and forswear the use of such occult practices because of the dangers inherent to the warp. He had entrusted only Magnus with the true secrets of the warp to which only they remained privy. But now it appeared that his son had disobeyed his edicts and, at the very least, dabbled in the occult and the forbidden black arts of psychic sorcery. The confrontation between father and son is recorded in the Grimoire Hereticus. He commanded that the Primarchs were to close their Legion's librarious departments forthwith, and not to indulge the undoubted psychic talents of those Astartes who possessed the gift. All existing Space Marine librarians were likewise forbidden to make use of their abilities and were to return to duty as line warriors. The Council's rulings also created a new position amongst the Space Marine legions, the Space Marine Chaplain, to uphold the Imperial truth and help maintain the purity of an Astartes legion's dedication and fidelity to the Emperor's commands. The Emperor ordered Magnus once more to cease the practice of sorcery and incantation, and the pursuit of all knowledge related to magic. Magnus, of course, did not like the idea, and he remained bitterly opposed to the decision made at Nikaea. But in the end, he bent his will to his father, the Emperor, and agreed to obey, though the machinations of the ruinous powers would ultimately lead to a far darker fate for Magnus the Red and his 1,000 sons. The edicts of Nikaea stood largely untouched for the next 10,000 standard years as the primary Imperial policy regarding human psychic mutation. Only the edict against the use of librarians within the ranks of the Space Marines, and later the Astra Militarum, would be reversed as a result of the Horus Heresy, as that terrible civil war made clear to the rulers of the Imperium after the conflict that Astartes and other sanctioned psykers were essential to combat the power of the forces of chaos. The Imperial Webway Project. Approximately 2 standard centuries into the Great Crusade, the Emperor decided to return to Terra to oversee a special project that he intended to cap his ambitions for humanity. This was the secret Webway Project, in which the Emperor planned to employ the assistance of a special artifact from the Dark Age of technology, the Golden Throne, that had been discovered on Terra beneath a huge and inhospitable desert on the continent of Asia. He planned to use it to enter and reshape the labyrinthine dimension of the Eldari Webway to serve as a direct and instantaneous transport network between all the worlds of the Imperium. This human portion of the Webway would recreate the vast network of warp gates that had once bound together the Old Ones and the Eldari's ancient interstellar empires, and would allow humanity to advance at a more rapid rate, scientifically and economically, than at any other time in its history. The Webway was a far more efficient means of travel, and most importantly, bypassed the depredations of chaos within the warp that represented a constant hazard of death or spiritual corruption to human faster-than-light space travel. The ultimate objective of the Webway project was for the Emperor to completely sever humanity from the need for the warp in its entirety. This would further deprive chaos of its power to corrupt and destroy, and weaken the psychic emanations that powered and sustained the chaos gods through the protective psychic wards that shrouded every Webway corridor. All these benefits would come as the Emperor guided his species within the protective embrace of the Webway in its evolution into a fully psychic race. This would assure its ascendancy on the galactic stage beyond what even the lost Eldari Empire had once managed to achieve, and unleash a golden age of human civilization unlike any before known. A human-dominated Webway would also truly unite the Imperium, preventing mankind from ever again being divided by time and great distance. But this project would require all of the Emperor's considerable attention, and had to be pursued in secret, lest the Eldari or other opponents of the project learn of it and seek to stop it before his efforts could come to fruition. The Golden Throne had been built during the Dark Age of technology to allow human access to the Webway, and took the form of a heavily mechanized throne created from an unknown type of psychically reactive, gold-complected alloy that was suspended over a pair of massive doors composed of the same golden alloy. These doors acted as the portal to the Webway, and were supposedly large enough for a Warhound-class Scout Titan to walk through upright. The Golden Throne was originally located in the subterranean depths of the Imperial Palace, where the Emperor's gene laboratory complex had once stood, an area known as the Imperial Dungeon. Hundreds of red-robed Mechanicum tech priests and servitors toiled in the Imperial Dungeon, as the Emperor sat upon the Golden Throne and used his immense psychic powers to hold the portal into the Webway open for his workers, who constructed a new section of the labyrinth dimension intended to connect Terra to the rest of the largely abandoned transdimensional transport network. Because the Webway had been constructed from a psychically resistant material intended to protect it from penetration by the entities of the warp, and humanity did not possess the technology required to replicate it, the Emperor had to personally shield the new human-built sections of the Webway from warp incursions. This required him to remain on the Golden Throne continuously, and was the reason why he had been forced to leave the Great Crusade in the hands of his Primarchs and return to Terra to oversee the project personally. As such, following the extraordinary victory of Imperial forces over the greatest Org-Warg encountered by the Imperium to that time during the Ullanor Crusade, the Emperor decided that he was no longer directly needed to command the efforts of the Great Crusade. To this end, the Emperor placed Horus, his favored and most talented son, in charge of the military advancement of the Great Crusade in his stead. Horus was foremost amongst the Primarchs, and was the first rediscovered by the Emperor on the dying world of Chthoniya, that lay so close to Terra that warp drive was not needed to reach the planet. He was the only Primarch to serve in the Crusade alongside his father for many solar decades, and was the most highly honored of his sons. The Primarch he most trusted and most loved. The two had fought together at the forefront of the early Great Crusade. The Emperor had protected Horus during the Siege of Release, while Horus repaid the favor during the Battle of Goro. During the Battle of Gyros-Thravian, the Emperor slew the mighty orc warboss Garkul Blackfang after it had held off 3 of his Primarchs. With such a history between them, the Emperor felt Horus was the man to lead the Great Crusade in his absence, granting him the unique title and rank of War Master. The Emperor declared that the time had come for his sons to show him what great leaders they were. Turning his back on direct military matters, he created the Council of Terra, the precursor of the Senatorum Imperialis, the Imperial tithe, and expanded the civil governing and bureaucratic bodies of the Imperium like the Adeptus Administratum, before retiring in seclusion beneath the Imperial Palace to begin work upon the Golden Throne and the Webway project. But his decision to not tell his sons why he had retired to Terra, as well as his decision to begin shifting the Imperium's government out of the direct control of the Primarchs on the War Council and the Terran nobility and bureaucrats whom they detested, sowed the seeds of discord among the Primarchs. So too did disquiet over the Emperor's decision to raise Horus above his brothers by naming him the War Master and thus their commanding officer. From these seeds of ambition, pride, and jealousy, the Chaos Gods would find fertile ground to corrupt many of the Primarchs and bring on the horrors of the Horus Heresy.